Hey guys, you know who this is. It's Mr. Morrow with another edition of Morrow Teaches Online. So, today is a very exciting day because we get to learn about trigonometry. It's a huge topic in math. Now, we're not going to go too far in depth with trigonometry. It's such an important topic. When you take Algebra 2, it's not just called Algebra 2, it's called Algebra 2 slash trigonometry. So this is a gigantic topic. But for this lesson and the next lesson, we're only going to teach you the intro to it. Because again, it does get a little difficult in those classes. So today is how do we calculate the trigonometric ratios of right triangles? So yes, we are working with right triangles. Just like Pythagorean theorem works with right triangles, this also does. What makes this cool is Pythagorean theorem only deals with sides. Trigonometry deals with sides and angles. I know, real cool. I know. So, let's just check our homework first. So remember, you can always pause the screen. So this was on scientific notation. Remember, if it's a small number, it will have a negative exponent. And if it's a big number, it will have a positive exponent. So again, you can always just pause the screen. And again, if you have a question or a concern, please ask your teacher. And remember, standard notation is just how we normally write numbers, not in scientific mode. Okay? So again, if you think something's wrong, let us know. Okay, when you multiply, remember it's okay. Multiply the coefficients, add the exponents. Okay, even though I hate calling them coefficients because they're not real. So you multiply it, and then you add the exponents. Again, you can pause the screen. If you have a question, ask. Division, just divide it, and then subtract the exponents. Okie dokie. And remember, for like number 16, you cannot leave your answer like this, because that is not a number between 1 and 10. So remember, when you swoop to the left, remember lurd. Lurd. If you're going left, if you're moving the decimal left, you're going to move the exponent up 1. If you're moving the decimal to the right, you're going to move the exponent down 1. And then the final part. And again, for number 21, you didn't have to leave your answer in scientific mode. You could have just written 80. And there it is. So, trigonometry uses the relationships between the sides and angles of right triangles to find missing angles or missing sides. Okay? So you're going to learn a lot of vocabulary words. Now, some of these words you may have known already. So, the big one, which you may have learned when we did Pythagorean theorem a long time ago. Okay? The hypotenuse. Again, that will always be across from the right angle. So a lot of people call it the diagonal side. I mean, it depends on how you draw the triangle, but sure, if you want to call it the diagonal side, sure. The hypotenuse is always also the longest side, always. Okay, so here's how you read it. You need to know which angle you're talking about. So if we're talking about angle A, here's what I like to draw. I like to draw a little curve like that, and again, you do that a ton in geometry, so you might as well get used to it. So you draw a curve, okay? So to label the sides, there are 3 sides. There's the hypotenuse, the opposite, and the adjacent. Now, the easiest one to label is the hypotenuse, because again, you find the right angle, which will always be there since we're working with right triangles. Then you look directly across from it, and that side will always be the hypotenuse. Okay? Now, looking at the angle. This is why you need to know which angle you're talking about. So in this case, we're dealing with angle A. Okay? So, I mean, it's kind of hard to see it, but do you see how it kind of looks like, if you ever looked at the side view of an eyeball, it kind of looks like that. Here are the eyelashes, and here's the eyeball. Okay? So let's play a game. What is the eye looking at right now? Do you see how it's looking at that wall? Do you see how it's looking at it? Well, whatever wall is opposite it, that will be the opposite side. The way to also know which side is the opposite side, if that's too confusing for you, is you just say, well, do you see how this angle is made up of these 2 sides? Well, whichever side it's not made up of, that's your opposite side, okay? So there it is. That's how you find the opposite side. And then the remaining side is called the adjacent side. Adjacent means next to. It needs to be touching. So like your next door neighbor, the ones that are directly to the left of you or directly to the right of you, they would be adjacent to you, okay? So that's how you label it. And usually we just label it as H, O, and A, okay? But now, let's say we were talking about angle B. Here's angle B. So I like to draw a curve so I know which one. The first step should always be label the sides. So find your right angle. There it is. So then that's your hypotenuse because it's across. What is angle B looking at now? It's looking at that side. That's the opposite, and the remaining side is the adjacent. Okay? So you've definitely have seen these buttons before, but you probably didn't see it written out. On your calculators, it's written as sin, cos, and tan. And you probably were like, what the heck are these for? Well, they stand for sine, cosine, and tangent. If you want to sound intelligent, don't ever say the sin of this or the cos of this or the tan of. Just say the sine, cosine, and tangent. Now, there's a way to remember this, and I'll teach it to you. Again, it's not a trick of mine. This is one of the most famous tricks in all of math, which you'll learn in a few seconds. So to find the sine, you take the opposite side and divide it by the hypotenuse, okay? For the cosine, you do the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. And for tangent, you do the opposite divided by the adjacent. Now, at this point, you're probably like, what? What does any of that mean? Again, when you see it done, you're going to say this isn't that hard. Now, the way to remember this is so ka toa. I know when you read this, you're like, what is that, a Native American like Pocahontas? No, Sohcahtoa. And I know you're like, why do you keep saying that? What does that mean? It means, here's the way to memorize all of the trigonometric functions. Sine is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Sine is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. Cosine is the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. Cosine, adjacent divided by hypotenuse. And tangent is the opposite divided by adjacent. Again, if you ask your parents and say, have you ever heard of Sohcahtoa? Most of them will say, oh yeah, I remember that. I don't remember what it was for, but yes, Sohcahtoa, it's very famous, okay? So, I wrote that at the top of the page, Sohcahtoa. Now, usually we leave them as fractions. Sometimes people make them the decimal versions. You can just leave it as a fraction. Now, before you can answer these questions, you have to label the sides to help you out. So we need to label it opposite, hypotenuse, adjacent. Now, the way you know which angle we're talking about is it will say sine of A, cosine of A, tangent of A. So we know we're talking about angle A. So once when I find out what angle we're talking about, I like to draw that little curve just to remind me. So now let's label the sides. There's my right angle. So across from that is the hypotenuse side. So I'm going to put an H right next to the 5. Okay. Now for the opposite side, which side is A looking at? A is looking at that side because it's opposite it. So put an O there. And then 3, by process of elimination, must be the adjacent side. So the first step always is label the sides, hypotenuse, opposite, adjacent. Now, for sine, sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Well, which number represents the opposite side? 4. So do 4 divided by, now we got to write the H. Well, what's the H? 5. And there's your answer. The sine of A, its trigonometric ratio, is 4 divided by 5. So it's literally just a matching game. But the only reason why kids get this wrong is because either they labeled the sides wrong or they forget about Sohcahtoa. I'm not even kidding. I have some kids that memorize it as Sohcahtoa. Yeah, Sohcahtoa. Memorize it. It will help you. Let me just fit these back in. Okay, now for cosine, cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Well, which number is the adjacent? 3. So we're going to do 3 divided by the h. Well, the h is 5. So cosine is 3/5. And then for tangent, tangent is TOA. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. So opposite, which is 4, over the adjacent, which is 3. And my pen stopped working. There we go. And there are your answers. Okay? So the first step is label the sides. The kids that don't label the sides, they're the ones that get it wrong because they're trying to do too much at once. So now we're talking about sine of B, cosine of B, tangent of B. So let's draw a curve at angle B. Let's label this. The right angle is there, so that's your hypotenuse. What side is B looking at? 16, that's the opposite, and 12 is the adjacent. Usually kids mix up opposite and adjacent. Remember, the opposite side will never be touching the angle that you're talking about. So if we're talking about angle B, the opposite side won't touch B. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite over the hypotenuse. Come on. Now, kids are probably wondering, do I need to simplify these fractions? You really don't. Unless someone says simplify it, usually you just leave it like that, which makes your life a lot easier. So cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. Well, the adjacent side is 12, and the hypotenuse is 20. And the tangent is TOA, opposite, which is 16, over adjacent, which is 12. And there are your answers. Good, good. Okay, so we got a few more. So which angle are we talking about? We're talking about angle B, because it says sine of B, cosine of B, tangent of B. So here we go. Sine of B. Well, let's label it first. Put the angle, right angle, whatever's across from it, that's your hypotenuse. Whatever's across from the angle, that's your opposite. And process of elimination, that's your adjacent. So again, anytime you get a trigonometric question, you should always write so, ka, toa. It will make your life 1,000 times easier. But again, if you don't memorize that, this becomes really hard. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is 6 in this question. Hypotenuse is 10. Okay, cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. The A is 8. Oh my God, I wrote A. Silly me. Go away. 8 over the hypotenuse, which is 10. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. Now, I know you're like, well, what is this for? This is kind of like a warm-up to what the actual topic is. But I don't want you to think this is not important, because a lot of times they do ask, hey, what's the trigonometric ratio? So this is very important to know. And again, sometimes people write them as decimals. Usually you see them as fractions. Okay, the next one. Sine of A, cosine of A, tangent of A. Sometimes they'll do like sine of A, cosine of B. So you got to be really careful with that. So we're going to talking about angle A. Okay, what's across from the right angle? That's your hypotenuse. What's across from the angle that we're talking about? That's your opposite. And whatever's remaining, that's your adjacent. Remember, the adjacent side will always be touching that angle. Okay? So sine is O over H. So 40 over 41. Cosine is A over H. So 9 over 41. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. So 40 over 9. Again, just listen to what it tells you to do. Some kids are like, oh yeah, the smaller number always goes on top. No, just follow the order it tells you to do. O over H, A over H, O over A. Just memorize that. Okay, so now here's where now the angles come into play. So again, we're teaching you stuff that you'll be using in geometry and algebra too. So this is just asking for the ratio. This is the new part. There's that symbol, and you're going to see that a ton in geometry. It stands for, so this symbol is the angle symbol, and the M stands for the measure of that angle. So now we actually want to know, hey, what is that angle? So this is why trigonometry is so cool, is because you'll be able to find the angles. So tangent of x. Well, the first thing you always do is label it. So tangent of x. Okay, what's across from the right angle? That's your hypotenuse. What's across from the x? That's your O, and then the remaining side is your A. So if we're only talking about tangent, what's tangent? Well, the way to remember it is TOA. So O over H. So O is 5, H is 13. So I'm so sorry, that's the hypotenuse. Oh my goodness. The A is 12. So there's your trigonometric ratio. Now we need to actually find out, hey, what is the angle? What is angle X? Like, how big is it? Is it 4 degrees, 8 degrees, 90 degrees, 70 degrees? So here's where you need to now make sure your calculator is set right. So before you do any trigonometric questions, you have to go to mode, and you got to go down to where it says radian. We don't want it in radians. When we talk about angles, we talk about degrees. You don't do radians till algebra 2, maybe in geometry, but in algebra 2, definitely. So you got to switch it to degrees. So go to degree, press enter, and then press second mode, which is quick. Now all your answers will come out right. So here we go. To find angle X, here's what you do. So if you notice, there's the 7, the 8, and the 9. If you look 2 buttons above that, there's where you see sin, cos, and tan. Again, it's sine, cosine, and tangent. Now, what else you need to notice is, above each one of those buttons, do you see in blue it says sine to the -1, cosine to the -1, and tangent to the -1? Whenever you need to find an angle, you're not going to press tangent or sine or cosine. You're going to press second that. So if you need to find an angle, press second whatever it is. So here's how you type it in. Do you see how it says tan is 5 over 12? So if I want to find the angle, you press second tan, and now press 5 over 12. So do you see how I'm just dividing it? And there it is, 22.6. Now, does it tell me what to round to? I don't think it does. So in that case, usually we round angles to the nearest whole number. So 0.6 makes it round up to 23. Now, if you did not get that, that's because you didn't switch the mode to degrees. That's why you have to do that first. So when you go, come on. So you would just type in 23, and then this is the degree symbol, and there's your answer. So it's 23 degrees. Okay? Now, here's how you know you pressed the wrong button. If you just press regular tan, 5 divided by 12, look what you get. You get 0.007. That would round to 0 degrees. 0 degrees, like if you used your hand, if you put your hands on top of each other, and you open it up, do you agree you can make like an angle? If you're telling me it's 0 degrees, that means your hand's not opening. That means it's not an angle. It's flat. So clearly we're not talking about that. So if you have to decide between 23 degrees or 0 degrees, it's probably the 23. Okay? So now sine of z. Do you see what they did? They now switched it up. Come on. Why aren't you working? There we go. So now we're talking about a totally different angle. Come on. Again, my stylus has been kind of glitching. Just saying. And I can't even get it. There we go. So sine of z. So now we're talking about z. Come on. Oh, the erase button wants to work, but the writing button doesn't. Okay, that makes sense. There we go. Now, if you notice, I don't have to change what the hypotenuse is because the hypotenuse doesn't move. But now, since I'm switching up the angles, now the opposite and adjacent will switch. What's opposite z? Not 5 anymore. Now it's the 12. Now the 5 is adjacent. So now if we're talking about sine, that's so. That's the trick. So we got to do opposite over hypotenuse. So opposite over the hypotenuse, which is 13. So that's the trigonometric ratio. Now to find the measure of the angle of z, here we go. Go to the calculator. We're using sine. But remember, when you want to find an angle, you press second whatever they're talking about. So second sine, 12 divided by 13. And you get, whoops, you get 67 degrees. And there it is. Come on. Now here's how you know you did it right. Now this is going back a long time ago. I'm hoping you've learned how many degrees are in a triangle. Does anyone remember? In a triangle, there's 100. Come on, why aren't you working? 180, come on, degrees. Well, let's do the math. How much is a right angle? 90 degrees. Okay, we need to get to 180. Guess what 23 plus 67 is? 90. Guess what 90 plus 90 is? 180. So you know you did it right, because if it doesn't add up to 180 degrees, then it's not a triangle. So there it is. Okay, let's answer this question. Sine of z. So draw it at z. So let's label the sides. Again, hypotenuse, because it's across from the right angle. What's z looking at? Z is looking at 40, so it's the opposite side. And the remaining side is the adjacent. Now, if we want sine, we want the so. So we need the opposite and the hypotenuse. So the opposite and the hypotenuse. So you get 40 over 58. So now to find angle z, you go to your calculator and you type in second sine 40 over 58, because I think that's what it said. And it's 43.6, so we'll round that to 44. So 44 degrees. Okay, and there's your answer. So now it says find random things. So it says find cosine of A, but sometimes it says find B. That's why if you use a pencil, it's probably better, because when you label it O and A, you're going to have to erase it then, because then we're talking about a different angle afterwards. So for me, I can just erase easily. So if we're talking about A, that's your hypotenuse. What's A looking at? A is looking at 21, and the adjacent side will always be right next to it, which is 20. So if I want cosine, cosine is ka, and so ka toa. So we need the 20, and we need the 29. 20 and 29. So I'm just going to erase that. Okay, so now we want cosine. So go to your calculator, type in second cosine 20 over 29. And you get 46 degrees, and that's what it stays at because it doesn't round. 46 degrees. Okay, now we got to relabel this. Whoops. So now we want angle B. I mean, this is still the hypotenuse because the right angle doesn't move, but now 20 is the opposite side, and 21 is the adjacent side. So for sine, we need so. We need the O and the H. So if you notice, the O and the H is also 20 over 29 because we're talking about a different angle. So now to find the other angle, press second sine of 20 divided by 29. And you get, that rounds to what, 44 degrees? So this is 44 degrees. And again, you know you did it right, because how much is a right angle? 90. 90 plus 46 plus 44 degrees, and you get your 180 degree triangle. So we did it right. Okay, now it just says use a calculator to find each ratio to the nearest 10,000. That's something we don't ask too often. Usually we ask for the nearest 10th, 100th, 1000th, but never usually 10,000. So that means we're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places for each. Now, do you see how they're actually giving me the angles now? So remember how I told you on your calculator, to find an angle, you're going to press second sine, second cosine, second tangent? Well, if they give you the angle, so they're giving me 45, you're just going to press the regular sine button. So I'm just going to press regular sine, 45. And you get that, 0.70710. So if I need 4 decimal places, we're just going to write 0.7071. 0.7071. Again, if you turn that into a fraction, while it wouldn't be exact, but that's kind of like what the decimal versions are of the fractions that we've been getting. So if you divided those fractions, they would be pretty close to these things. Okay, now here's how you know which button to press. So like I just said, sine of 45 was the right answer because they gave us the angle and we wanted to find the trigonometric ratio. You know it's not second sine because look what happens when you try to do second sine of 45. Yeah, an error message. You think that's right? I don't. So that should tell you which button to press, because if you're getting error messages, you probably pressed the wrong version of sine. Okay? So now tangent of 62. So we go to the calculator, you just click regular tangent 62, and you're going to copy that 1.8807, and then there's a 2. So remember, we need 4 decimal places, so that 2 doesn't do anything, so it's just 1.8807. 1.8807. Okay, cosine of 110. Cosine of 110. Negative 0.3420, and that 2 won't do anything, so negative 0.3420. Negative 0.3420. And then sine of 9. Sine of 9 degrees. Where are you? Sine of 9. 1.1564, and that 3 doesn't do anything. So 0.1564. 0.1564. Okay? And now let's just go backwards. So now they're giving me the trigonometric ratio, and they want us to find to the nearest degree the angle. So now that we're finding an angle, instead of typing in a fraction, we're just typing in a decimal. So remember, when they give you the ratio and you want to find an angle, you have to press second whatever that trigonometric ratio is. So second sine 0.9848. Okay, 0.9848. 79.9. Well, they told us to round to the nearest degree, so that's 80 degrees. Okay, the next one is cosine 0.8387. Again, we need to press second sine. So second cosine 0.8387. I think that's what it said. 32.9. Again, that rounds to 33. Did I type this in right? 0.8387. Yep. All right. So 33 degrees. Okay, the next one is tangent 0.2867. So again, to find an angle, you have to press second tangent 0.2867. 15.9, that rounds to 16 degrees. And the last one is cosine. So second cosine, since we want to find an angle, negative, and don't forget about the negative point. You don't need the 0. 5592. And you get 124 degrees, and there it is. So today was the intro to trigonometry. Next lesson will be about how to find missing angles and how to find missing sides using this. So again, we're still only going to be talking about the basics of trigonometry, but again, this is what you're going to be doing in geometry and algebra 2. So this is very important to know, and just remember, SOHCAHTOA. Yes, it's going to be fun to say. It's very fun to say SOHCAHTOA. It's been fun. Until next time, this has been Mr. Morrow.